Cheap pocket knife versus expensive pocket knife. Is it really worth the extra price? Everyone should own a pocket knife for their everyday tasks, but does it really matter on how much you spend? Well, today I have two pocket knives that are similar in some ways and different in others. One thing's for sure, the price is very different. For the cheap knife, I'm not just picking a junky, no-name knife. It's inexpensive, but from a trusted manufacturer and better than a random gas station knife. That is the Ka-Bar Dozier Folding Hunter. I paid about $25 for this knife. For the expensive knife, I'm not going with a high-end custom knife that costs an arm and a leg. It's a knife that is attainable for many, but still an expensive knife. That is the Benchmade Bug Out, a knife originally designed for ultralight hikers that became popular for everyday carry. I paid about $160 for this knife. Being designed as a lightweight outdoor knife, the Bug Out comes in really light at 1.9 ounces. A CPM S30V blade at a length of 3.24 inches, and a blade thickness of 0.09 inches. The handle is made of Grivery, which is a glass-filled thermoplastic. The Dozier has a similar philosophy to the Bug Out and weighs in at 2.3 ounces. AUS 8A stainless steel blade at a length of 3 inches and a thickness of 0.11 inches. The handle material is Zytel, which is another type of thermoplastic, similar to the Grivery of the Benchmade. Up close, the texture looks very similar. The Dozier, while made by an American company that makes many knives in America, it's not actually made in America. It's made in Taiwan. Think what you want about that, it doesn't mean it's bad, but it isn't made in country. The Bug Out is made by an American company and is made in the USA. You can imagine that may reflect in some of the price difference. The action and the lock. This area is where these knives completely differ. The Dozier has a back lock. Nothing inherently wrong with a back lock, it's a classic style of lock, pretty simple. The one thing I don't like about backlocking knives is that you can't really close them one-handed. Well, you can, but it's not really intuitive. Not a deal breaker per se, but I do prefer having a knife that I can open and close with one hand easily. The Bug Out has the axis lock, where you pull down on the lock bar and the blade drops. You can also use that to open the knife. The great benefit to the axis lock is you can easily open and close it with one hand, and your finger never has to cross within the path of the blade, like on other style locks. In the action of the two, the Benchmade is definitely more smooth. The Ka-Bar came pretty stiff, and as I've been opening it, it has smoothed out a little bit, but because of the aggressiveness of the thumb stud, it does dig into your finger quite a bit. The blade shape of these are both considered drop points, but they do look quite different. The tip of the Dozier tapers off a lot later and lacks a swedge that the Benchmade has. The Bug Out has a high flat grind, whereas the Ka-Bar has a hollow grind. What I found for slicing, for example, cutting up a tomato, the slicing feels pretty much the same. Although the Dozier is slightly thicker, the hollow grind really helps it. As far as slicing goes, I would say they're very similar, but I have to give the edge to the Benchmade here. The blade is just that small amount thinner and makes it a little slicier, but really it's very close. As far as carrying, there's some difference here. Both are tip up with the ability to switch the clip to either side. The Benchmade comes with a deep carry style clip, allowing the knife to nearly disappear in your pocket. The Ka-Bar does stick out a bit more, especially when putting the clips side by side. If having a deep carry clip is important to you, Benchmade does a really good job with that. The weight of these knives are very similar. They're not going to make a big difference for carry. As far as edge retention goes, this is where I think a lot of the cost is going to be realized. CPM S30V is considered a super steel, where AUS 8 is considered a budget steel. These knives haven't been used for much and not sharpened yet by me, so these are the factory edges, although I did strop them, and they did become a bit sharper. I will say the Benchmade came noticeably sharper, but the Ka-Bar is still sharp enough to slice paper. This isn't going to be super scientific, but I'll start by slicing some paper. Then I'll be cutting an equal amount of cardboard and see if it still cuts the paper. During this test, the blade geometry was actually very noticeable. Because the Benchmade is thinner, it sliced a lot easier through the cardboard. They both still managed to cut the paper after cutting some cardboard. The factory edges on these aren't really the best, and if you want the full potential of these blades, you'll have to sharpen them yourself. Now I'm going to do some chops on a piece of wood and see how the edge holds up. After 30 chops, the dozer still slices paper, but not super cleanly. The bug out slices it no problem. After 60 chops, the dozer seems to have dulled out a bit, while the bug out still slices nicely. After 90 chops, the K-bar has definitely dulled significantly and can't really slice the paper anymore. The bug out, while not perfect, still goes through with ease. Pretty big difference when it comes to the steel. So is it really worth it to spend all that money on a pocket knife? Well, between these two, the biggest differences are going to be where it's made, carry profile, action, the biggest one being the steel. The edge retention is much better on the more expensive knife. I prefer the lock on the Benchmade, but that's just the difference in lock designs, although the Benchmade is definitely smoother. So at the end of the day, which one should you go with? The cheaper knife will do you fine and get the job done without costing you that much, but it won't hold an edge as long. If you're into knives and want something with a nicer steel, the Benchmade's price may be justified. Personally, either one would be fine, but I prefer the bug out for the steel and the action. There's a lot of other knives, especially ones competitive to the Benchmade's price, so stay tuned for more cheap versus expensive comparisons. If you enjoyed today's video, click the like button and subscribe for more videos. I'll see you next time.